Start the clock. Let's go. Welcome, friends, to another episode of My Body, My Jokes. I never get tired of saying that name, man. It's Morgan Lorraine Gallo, that is. I don't think I need to say all three names every time now. I hope that by episode 22, maybe I guess this is, 21, 22, that you know my name. But it's me. I'm coming to you from Dude IDK Studios in Denver. It is so fucking cold here. We've been going through what they call an Arctic blast, which is nice. So I have my little smiley face blanket on me today. I'm wearing my Akatar tights. If you're a fan of Court of Thorns and Roses, they make Akatar tights now on Snag. I love the tights. They're not sponsored, but maybe they should be a sponsor because I do love their tights. Curvy girls unite under their tights. Thank you for listening to this podcast. If you'd like to support me, you know all the things. Throw me a like, a comment, rate, review, subscribe, do all the things. Smash that like button. If you ever have anything to share, please feel free to DM me. A few of my past episodes recently have been me answering listener questions, which has been honestly kind of cool. Like, it's nice to feel like I might have something to contribute to people's lives. I don't know how accurate the information is, but I'm doing my best. So if you ever have anything to say, share, ask, feel free to DM me, Morgan Lorraine Gallo, everywhere on social, or email the podcast at mybodymyjokespod@gmail.com, and I'll get back to you because I do check that email frequently. Other than that, if you're in the Denver area, I have some exciting shows coming up that I am helping produce, and I am really excited because February is going to be a super dope month. So February 8th, Hourglass Social right here at Dude IDK Studios. My ally, non-binary femme comedy show starts with a social hour, free drinks, free snacks, ends in a comedy show right here at Dude IDK. Help sponsored by Live Laugh Denver, by Lindsay Benton. I love her. The last show was a hit, so we are actively in promo for that show. It's going to be awesome. I have some really funny friends performing on that show. And then another show that I am almost a little bit more excited about, to be honest, is I have been working with the Eating Disorder Foundation here in Denver, and they have graciously asked me to help put on a roast of diet culture show for them at the end of February, which will be Eating Disorder Awareness Week. So February 27th, right here in Denver at the Mercury Cafe, I will be hosting a roast of diet culture comedy show with, I think, maybe 7 other comics. It's going to be a roast style show where we go up and we talk shit about diet culture, the wellness industry, how stupid health influencers are, all that kind of fun stuff. And it's going to be benefiting the Eating Disorder Foundation in tandem with bringing awareness to eating disorder recovery and recovery work. So I'm really excited about that. Links for both of those shows are all over the place. My link tree, my website, the show notes, anywhere you click that you're probably going to find it. So Hourglass Social, February 8th, and Roast of Diet Culture show on February 27th in Denver. So come on over to Denver if you're not too afraid of the cold. But today, I'm going to talk about something that I didn't know I was going to talk about until I went to therapy yesterday. So shout out to Dolores for giving me this topic, because I spend a lot of time overthinking, I should say, about what to say on this podcast, how to say it, who to interview, how to represent certain groups, and make sure that I'm, spreading enough perspectives across the world fairly. And I really didn't know what I wanted to talk about this week. And I met with my therapist, and we've been talking a lot about perfectionism and how I struggle a lot with perfectionism in my daily life, and especially within the last year through recovery and dealing with this kind of step back I'm taking from, I guess, my quote unquote career or comedy journey, whatever you want to call it. And so she suggested, well, why don't you talk about perfectionism? And in particular, why don't you kind of touch on perfectionism in eating disorders? And I thought that was really insightful. So I decided to write some things down. I was literally sitting there taking notes in my therapy session while she was taking notes. Mostly because I forget what we talk about in therapy all the time. So I need to start writing it down. But I do think it's important to talk about. So if you're a perfectionist, if you're a high achiever, if you are someone that goes throughout your life constantly trying to achieve the unachievable, this episode is for you. Without further ado, everything that I'm going to be talking about today, or most of the things, are pieces of info that I gathered from verywellmind.com. It was very insightful about perfectionism, and it kind of breaks down what perfectionism is. So let's get into it. What is the idea of perfectionism? What is it? It's this idea that moral, physical, social, religious perfection is attainable. So it could mean a bunch of different things to a bunch of different people. You know, if you're like a Catholic, it might be, perfectionism is being 100% dedicated to Catholicism, the Bible, the Catholic guilt, right? If you're someone in an eating disorder, perfectionism might be sticking to your rigid eating disorder plans and ideals and never straying from it. If it's more of a social thing, if you have a lot of social anxiety, your perfectionism might manifest as, I have to say the perfect thing, I have to have the perfect relationships, I have to make sure that I'm being the perfect friend, that kind of thing. So it manifests in a lot of different ways for different people. Overall, it is a largely anxiety/OCD based fear of judgment from others, fear of failure. So if you are someone that is a really high achiever, but on top of the high achieving, you put this pressure on yourself for everything to be not only good, but perfect, that is perfectionism, right? If you were a student growing up where you wrote an essay and you were mad that you got an A- because you felt like everything you did was perfect to the T, the font was perfect, the MLA structure, the conclusion, the thesis statement, everything was perfect, and you were mad about that, that's kind of what perfectionism is. It definitely manifests for me as a fear of failure. What this website pointed out, which I thought was really interesting, is there's a few different types of perfectionism. So the 3 different types of perfectionism are socially prescribed perfectionism, other-oriented perfectionism, and self-oriented perfectionism. Socially prescribed perfectionism involves high standards and social pressure to succeed. This type contributes to poor self-confidence and feelings of anxiety. That feels really common. Like, to me, that feels like the one that maybe most people kind of identify with. Other-oriented perfection involves having high expectations of other people. This type can contribute to conflict and relationship problems. This one might be kind of the one that like a parent exhibits or a loved one exhibits because they push their perfectionism on their children, their loved ones, their friends, their spouses, whoever, right? Self-oriented perfectionism is a more adaptive form characterized by high motivation, resourcefulness, and positive emotions. This one I feel is like kind of tricky. It's a little confusing, right? Because it's saying that it's self-oriented perfectionism, it's high motivation, it's resourcefulness, it's positive emotions. That to me feels like more high achieving, because the root of perfectionism is that fear of failure. It's that negative emotion driving you to the perfection. But I think it's kind of cool to know that they are all separated into categories, right? So socially, other-oriented, self-oriented. I definitely identify most with like the self-oriented, but to me, it's not driven by positive emotions. To me, it is driven by no one likes you, everyone hates you, you're terrible at this, you need to get better, and if you don't, you fail and you're going to suck and no one's going to like you. So that's where I'm at personally. I looked up the causes of perfectionism because I think a lot of people might assume like, oh yeah, I'm just a perfectionist because like, I was always like a really high achieving student, or like my parents always pushed me to be perfect, or, you just always wanted to be really liked. But what really like causes it? What makes a person look at themselves, look at the world around them and say, it needs to be this one rigid way. It cannot be any other way. First one, which is pretty obvious, a fear of judgment or disapproval from others. That seems pretty clear, right? A lot of us do things out of the fear of judgment from others. I've struggled with that a lot, especially being a comedian. Like, how do I make the perfect joke? How do I make the perfect set? Because I'm scared other comedians are going to see what I do and not like it or talk shit. Early childhood experiences, such as having parents with unrealistically high expectations. That's one I know a lot of people can relate to. Sometimes parents will put the expectation on their children of, you need to be a star athlete, you need to be a star student, you need to be incredibly gifted and talented. And that child who might be inherently motivated and inherently talented ends up being someone who is riddled with anxiety and stress because the constant pressure coming from an external source doesn't exactly make the perfection happen. It just kind of makes it the standard. So it never really feels like you're actually meeting it. Another one is having a mental health condition associated with perfectionist tendencies, such as obsessive compulsive disorder. That one is, I feel like, pretty standard. I don't know a ton about obsessive compulsive disorder. This is hyperlinked. Oh, I wonder if I should go to the hyperlink. What is OCD? Oh my God, it's a picture of someone washing their hands. I feel like that's really redundant. Of the OCD isn't just people who like are germy. Characterized by obsessions and compulsions that interfere with daily life. Obsessions, distressing, violent thoughts, images, compulsions, counting things, excessive washings, ordering things. Okay, yeah. So needing things to be in a specific way, standard, system, category, whatever it is in your brain, and not being able to deviate from it. Poor self-esteem, feelings of inadequacy, a need for control, tying self-worth to achievements. Ding, ding, ding. Morgan. Poor self-esteem. My therapist gave me this little equation, if you will, yesterday. She said, our self-esteem is the core beliefs and messages that we have about ourselves, coupled with the messages that we take in from what other people tell us. And she made sure that I was clear on the take in part about messages from others, because people might tell you, you are great, you are worthy, you are valuable, you are a kind person. But if there are some people that are telling you the opposite and you're only taking in those opposite negative messages, that's what manifests into your self-esteem. Because if you take in everything that everyone says, it's going to be a little different, right? Whereas perfectionists, we tend to take in the negative. We tend to really focus on, you might get like 100 comments on a video, but the one that's mean to you is the only one you focus on, because the 99 positive ones, you're like, okay, well, those people already like me, so I don't have to work at it. But this one person doesn't like me, so now I have to prove why they should like me, if that makes sense. Perfectionists actually tend to achieve less and stress more than high achievers. I highlighted this as a sentence from the article from verywellmind.com because it's really telling, right? Perfectionists actually tend to achieve less and stress more than high achievers. This is so true, and it rung so true with me, and ultimately is why I decided to do an episode about this, because so often being a high achiever, especially when you're young, is really celebrated, right? There's constantly media and pressure about, 30 under 30, right? 40 under 40. Like, who are the youngest people doing the biggest, baddest things in the world? And they're the most celebrated because they're the prodigies, right? We've all seen the kids on TikTok that are 10 years old and are like professional skateboarders. They're designing couture dresses, right? And they're achieving what feels like more than you'll ever be able to do at the age of 30 something. And so I really identified with this because I feel like within the last year or two, especially with comedy, I've looked at my career and I've looked at what I've done, and I've always been the comic that everyone is surprised to hear, oh, she's only 2 years in. Oh shit, she's only 3 years in. Damn, she's going on tour. She's headlining. She's 2 years in. You know what I mean? And I loved that. I loved being the like prodigal, like chosen one, right? I loved impressing people when they'd be like, how long have you been doing comedy? And I'm like, 2 years. And they're like, what? It seems like you've been doing it so much longer, because I was so high achieving and it was so praised. And because it's so praised when you're young, you keep going for that gold standard. And as you get older, it gets tougher because life happens, right? And as you get older, you have bills to pay. You have careers to dean. You have things that you have to do that are so different from when you're younger and maybe things are taken care of, or your health is completely different, or your mental health is different, or your money situation, whatever it is. And I think that ultimately is why a lot of high achieving people become perfectionists, because it feels like I've already been able to attain this insane standard at such a young age. So who's to say that when I get older, it's not just going to get better, right? The gold standard's not going to become the platinum standard. And so that was really, that just felt really intentional for me to read, that perfectionists actually tend to achieve less and stress more, because we do stress a lot more. A lot of the time, stress freezes us. It puts you in fight or flight mode, right? I've been seeing a lot of like funny reels and TikToks about how people joke about how like their body can't tell whether they're being chased by a bear or they just have to answer an email from their scary boss because our bodies like haven't evolved to understand the difference between those two. So a lot of us are being put into fight or flight by really high stress situations, especially because our society really values exhaustion and high stress and high paced. Have you ever noticed how a lot of companies, when they advertise for positions, they're like, we're a fast-paced company. We need someone who's going to hold their own and blah, blah, blah. And there's always this idea that being a workaholic, being fast-paced, being high-paced is really good. It means you're a good worker, instead of kind of zooming out and seeing, oh, this person's actually living in chaos. Oh, this person may not be getting as much work done because the chaos is impeding upon their ability to finish something. But our society doesn't look at that, right? We don't look at time off. We don't look at mental health. We don't look at these things and think, oh, maybe things would be better if we gave people time. Like when the pandemic happened and everyone went home, and people who were able to keep their jobs ended up getting more work done. And then people were like, oh, shit. Like they're working from home and now they're less stressed because they can take care of their kids and do laundry, and they're not spending money on eating out at work or gas money or whatever. And it's hilarious how we learn things as a society, but we don't move on. Okay, so that's perfectionism in like a little nutshell, little tiny mini lesson nutshell. How does it manifest? Oh, I have a runny nose and I'm like sniffing into the mic. How does it manifest? Perfectionism in our society is encouraged and seen as high achieving, right? I just said that. A lot of people joke that their biggest weakness is perfectionism, right? I remember being in job interviews out of college, and they're always like, what's your biggest strength? And you're like, organization. And then they're like, all right, let's be honest. We want to know what your biggest weakness is. And you're like, my biggest weakness is that I'm a perfectionist. And every employer that's interviewing is secretly like, yeah, that's what we want. Like, we want you to be that way, because we don't want your weakness to be like, oh, I drink a lot and I come hungover to work every day. Perfectionism is this like sneaky superpower that people think is a good thing to have, when really it can be like a debilitating mental situation. I've noticed a lot that in job interviews, or even in just conversations with peers, being a perfectionist is this kind of double standard where it's like, yeah, it sucks for your mental health, but like it also means you're getting a lot of shit done. It also means that you're achieving a lot, right? It means that you're doing more than other people, but those people may not see that behind the work, behind the facade, you're actually really suffering. And it causes more stress. It's caused me a lot more stress. I feel like since I have been a kid, I've either always been dancing, always been doing extracurriculars. I had 2 internships when I was in college. I graduated college early because I took extra classes over the summer, and I was teaching dance and minoring in dance, and I was performing on a semi-professional dance crew. And then when I got out of college, I was working full time, and I lived in my own apartment and paying for all my own shit, and I was teaching dance again, and then I moved, and then I always do more than I need to do. And when I started comedy, I was working a full-time job, and it was the pandemic, so I had stopped coaching the dance team that I was coaching because they all got sent home. But I was still going out of my way to do more. I convinced myself I would loved running for some reason. And I would run 3 miles every morning. And I was super steeped in my eating disorder. And I was going above and beyond with my eating disorder, thinking I was doing so good. I was hacking health. I was biohacking because I was not only working out all the time, but I was eating as little food as possible and drinking a bunch of water and tanning and skincare and oil in my hair every night. Like I was so obsessive over doing so much that the past year that I've been in recovery and I've kind of been told to calm the fuck down, my body is coming out of fight or flight mode, and it's a really weird feeling. It feels like time is slowing. It feels like I am losing my worth. It feels like I am becoming this lazy stay at home person. Even though I'm still doing a lot, it doesn't feel that way because I'm used to doing so much more. I actually said this to my therapist the other day. I was like, I don't do anything. And I feel guilty all the time because my boyfriend works his ass off. We live together now. So I see him going to work every day, coming home late. He's doing all this shit. He has all these clients. All these people love him. I feel like I'm not doing shit. And she's like, what did you do the other day? And I was like, well, I got up and I cleaned the kitchen and I made myself breakfast. And I edited my podcast, and then I read my book for a while, and then I went on a walk, and then I took a shower, and I did all my skincare, and then I vacuumed, and then I hung out with my cat for a little bit, and then I read some more, and then I don't remember what I said. I think watched a movie or something, and she's like, you did a lot. And in my head, I'm like, no, I didn't though. All I did was sit around the house. And she's like, no, you cleaned. You took care of yourself. You stuck to your meal plan, right? I always forget that eating is a part of recovery. She's like, you read a book, you went for a walk, you're taking care of your mental health and your body by doing those things. You spent time with your pets. They love you. They need you. You clean your house. You're doing things for yourself, but it doesn't feel like it because perfectionists tend to only see the value in productivity. We tend to only look at, I can't be doing something unless it is inherently productive, right? So if I'm watching TV, I have to also be doing something that's productive while I'm watching TV, or else I'm just being lazy and I'm a failure and, import a million negative thoughts, right? And it kind of made me realize that, oh, not only am I doing stuff, but I also am kind of supposed to be in this state of rest right now because I'm literally recovering from an eating disorder. And even though it's already been a year, I'm still such a baby in terms of recovery that waking up and deciding to feed myself and to wash my face and brush my teeth and put on clothes and take care of my room, that in and of itself is taking care and being productive. It's just not what I'm used to. It's not, going to a board meeting at 8 a.m. and meeting with 3 people and getting a bunch of emails done. Yeah, that's a completely different type of productive. And thank God I don't live in that world anymore because I really don't want to do that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how perfectionism manifests in eating disorders because, as you know, it's My Body, My Jokes. We talk about eating disorder stuff on this podcast. So little bit of a trigger warning. I'm going to talk about specific behaviors. I'm not going to use any numbers, but I'm going to talk about specific behaviors. If you are someone that doesn't like to listen to that stuff, feel free to skip ahead. Don't listen to the rest of the episode. If you're cool with it, feel free to stick around. Just want to give a warning because I know sometimes talking about specific behaviors can be a little triggering for folks. So one of the ways perfectionism manifests in eating disorders for a lot of people is this all or nothing thinking. And this is very relatable because in, I would say, like alcoholism, we always talk about being on the wagon, being off the wagon, right? There's this like metaphorical wagon, and we're in like 18th century America for some reason. And when you're on the wagon, there's no booze. And when you're off the wagon, there's a bunch of booze on the prairie floor or fucking whatever. I don't know who came up with this metaphor. But the idea is like you're either on or off. There's no gray area, right? And it's because with alcohol, you don't need it to survive. So you don't have to like develop a better relationship with it. It's either you're drinking and you're engaging in your alcoholism, or you're not drinking if you're an alcoholic, right? And so in eating disorders, it's kind of similar but different because you have to eat to survive and you have to, move your body to survive. But in eating disorders, a lot of it kind of comes through as the binge restrict cycle. And I've talked about this before. The binge restrict cycle can be categorized as a cycle with which you constantly switch from the all or the nothing, the black and the white, right? So the restriction being you're quote unquote on the wagon, right? You're restricting your food intake, you're counting your calories, you're over exercising, you're being maybe a little obsessive over like how many minutes am I exercising, how many ounces of water am I drinking, how many calories am I eating, how many bites am I taking, how many times am I chewing my food before I swallow it, how many types of vegetables am I eating today? What kind of colors am I eating today? It can manifest in a lot of different ways, right? So when you're restricting, you're like on the wagon, metaphorically. And then when you get to a place where your body can't take the restriction anymore and you're really hungry, or you go through some emotional turmoil, you've been avoiding your emotions through restriction, and you kind of get this like urge to binge, you start to binge, and then it's, oh, I'm off the wagon, and everything else is like damned to hell, right? You're not looking at calories. You don't give a fuck about the water anymore. You don't care about vegetables. You're like, I'm just going to eat anything and everything in front of me, and I'm off the wagon, and that's it. That's it. I fucked up my diet. I'm doing this now, right? We always talk about the joke of how like, oh, I ate one Oreo, I might as well eat the whole sleeve. A lot of people talk about that in diet culture. That's kind of like it's like a sentence that floats around. And it's that same idea of like, oh, I'm on this diet, I'm on the wagon, I'm in that all part, right? And now I fucked it up by doing whatever. For me, it used to be if I was restricting and I decided to skip a workout, or if I decided to skip a dance class or skip my planned exercise, that was my trigger to be like, oh, I fucked up my diet. Now I'm going to go binge because it doesn't even matter. Because if I don't do it all perfectly, right, perfectionism, then I'm not doing it well at all. So I'm just going to damn it all to hell and binge, and I'm going to completely fuck it up the other way. And that is really common amongst eating disorders. People who don't suffer from the binge restrict cycle can sometimes experience it in a little bit of a different way, right? They might purge. They might restrict even harder. They might go through kind of cycles of like exercising. Like, am I over exercising every single day, or am I just not exercising at all and I'm just like laying on the couch every single day and making every excuse not to move? So it's that all or nothing thinking of, I'm either doing something perfectly the way that I have deemed it perfect, or I'm not doing it at all. And it's really interesting to see that people with eating disorders look at it so differently. And I've met so many people now who are in recovery, who have been through recovery, who are actively in recovery, that look at their perfect idea of what the perfect eating disorder is. And I look at that and I'm like, who the fuck came up with that? Why are you forcing yourself to eat every color of the rainbow? That doesn't make sense. But to them, in their mind, they're excusing it and they're like, oh yeah, I have to eat every color of the rainbow every day or else I'm not getting the antioxidants, I'm not getting the vitamins, I'm gonna die. Like it's clear that it's a very personal, individualized type of perfectionism in eating disorders. And a lot of the time it happens in dieting, right? I talked about this in my unedited story episode, how on Weight Watchers, that was when I kind of learned to restrict all week and then binge at the end of the week after I got weighed in, because it was like, all right, I have a week to make up for the binge. I'm going to binge tonight. I'm going to use all my points or whatever. And then I'm going to diet for the next 6 days, and I'm going to diet so hard. I'm going to do it so well. Not only am I going to eat the amount of, I'm going to go under the amount of points. I'm going to exercise more, and I'm going to do it so perfect. I'm going to lose so much weight. And that's what got me into the binge restrict cycle of constantly starving, getting to a place where I can't starve anymore, then binging, then getting so sick after binging for so long, whether it's days at a time, weeks at a time, and then being like, okay, I need to fucking eat a carrot or something, and then going back into the restricting, oh, I need to lose all this weight. And so it goes on for sometimes for 15 fucking years. Over-exercising is a big one. Thinking a slip up and eating means we have to compensate for it. Compensation is a big one. How it has manifested for me, specifically perfectionism, is I have really low self-esteem. And I think some people might be surprised to hear that, because I maybe don't, I think I'm a little bit more obvious about it now, but I think while I've been doing comedy, it doesn't seem that way because, you know, obviously what you put on the internet is a highlight reel of your life. And I look very confident on stage. I am very confident on stage because in a way it's like an exaggerated version of me. I'm not really Morgan on stage. I'm like Morgan the comedian. And people would be surprised to hear that I think very little of myself and have thought very little of myself for a very long time. And it's gotten better as I've gotten older, as I've recognized like, okay, I don't need to care so much about what people think. I don't need to sit here and harp on my looks or harp on my intelligence or look at what I've done and think that in any way, shape, or form it's a failure because I haven't found, you know, this big, great career. But again, like our self-esteem is the beliefs we have about ourselves mixed with the messages that we take in from others. And a lot of the time I find myself talking in therapy about experiences that I experienced 15 years ago, you know, things that I experienced in high school that feel more vivid to me than a memory from 2 years ago. And the reason for that is because I've held on to the messages that I was told about myself when I was growing up because I was an awkward kid. I really wanted to stand up for myself. I really hated bullies, but I was also kind of a bully myself. I didn't know who I was. I was in my eating disorder. I was always the chubby girl. I thought that that made me a target. I thought that that made me, you know, this ugly person that no one wanted to be around. And I always lashed out. I always took it out on other people. I took it out on myself. I spent a lot of time self-pitying, and that was like such a formative experience that even now at 29 years old, I still feel like that 16, 17-year-old girl, even though the last 4 years have completely shifted my life. You know, I started doing comedy. I started touring. I've met a completely different set of people. I've met my wonderful boyfriend, and like I live with him now and I have a completely different life and I'm in recovery. And it's so weird because I hold on to those messages from a version of me that hasn't existed for more than a decade. But because that version of me felt so little, I keep her in my pocket constantly. And I think it's also because there's a part of me that wants to hold on to her because I feel like if I let go of her, then she's going to be on her own and I can't help her anymore. And that sounds so weird, but like my inner child, sometimes I look at her and I'm like, I don't know what to do to help you. So I'm just going to keep dragging you along with me. Oh man, I just got teared up when I said that. I think my low self-esteem also comes from the fact that like many perfectionists, I derive a lot of my value from my productivity. So something I've recognized is like, oh, I actually don't have a lot of self-worth unless I am producing something. And comedy taught me that more than anything, because once I started doing comedy, I started posting on the internet a lot. Once I started posting on the internet a lot, I started to gain a following. And I gained a following pretty quickly for someone who was only a few years into comedy. And, you know, I had a little bit of an extra oomph. Like, I have a degree in PR. I know how to edit. I know how to caption. I'm a really quick learner. So I was able to really get on like the trend of stand-up clips before they really started to blow up. And so I gained a big following. And I started to see that as my value. I started to see like, okay, my value is I have 245,000 followers on TikTok. My value is I have 4 videos that have gotten over 4 million views. My value is every time someone sees my account as a comedian, they automatically think that I'm a legitimized comedian and they want to book me because they see my followers and they think, oh, she has followers, she must be funny, she must be someone that I want to work with, I'm going to book her. And I saw a lot of my value in my bookings. I used to post every month. I would post a poster of all of my dates. And the longer the poster was, the tinier the font, the more shows that I had to cram into the dates, the better I felt. And you could scroll back on my Instagram and you could see posters where there's like 20 something shows in a month, right? And they're all over the place. It's like Florida, Tennessee, Georgia. And then, you know, it was Colorado, California. I was doing all these festivals, fucking South Dakota, you know, Cincinnati. And I felt like because I was traveling and doing all these shows, I was like, clearly I must be worth something, right? Because people want to book me. But I was also fucking miserable because touring is really hard. There's not a lot of money in comedy, so I was spending money or breaking even to go perform and sometimes have a shitty time. It's not always fun to like be in a hotel room by yourself for a weekend while you're performing if you don't know anyone in the city, or if you're on tour with someone and you're staying at an airport hotel, you know? And so when I kind of stopped doing that, my self-worth really dropped because I was like, oh, people probably look at my Instagram now and they see that I'm like not touring. They see that I'm not posting posters anymore. Oh shit, people think I quit comedy. Like, what do I have to offer? And I'll be honest, even with this podcast, sometimes I feel like I am fucking running in circles because I sit here and I think, okay, is the podcast worth something? Are the people listening getting anything out of this? Are there people that I am helping change their lives? And I, honest to God, really hope I am. And if I'm not, then I gotta accept that and it's okay because at least it's cathartic for me. But I've spent so much time getting my validation from external sources that now at my big age, I gotta kind of like rewind and be like, okay, we don't need to keep looking at other people to give you validation. I don't need to keep thinking that I need likes or virality or approval from other comedians or other people in the industry or even other people in the recovery space. I don't need their approval to be worthy, to be someone that deserves air and attention and food and water and health. Like I don't need people to tell me that I deserve those things. So that's what I'm working on. It's funny because a lot of that perfectionism has also stemmed from like not only the eating disorder, but the external source, ironically, of having, you know, a parent be really hard on me, who also taught me that if I got validation from her, then I was worthy. So I started by putting my validation in my mom's approval of me, whether it was, you know, does she like my outfit? Does she think my hair looks good? Does she like my nails? Like if I got my nails done, I always asked her if she liked it. And if she didn't really like it, I always kind of felt bad. If I bought something at Marshall's and she didn't like it, I always felt bad. If I had a dance performance and I felt like I did really well, but she was like, I don't know, I just didn't care for that song. Even if it had nothing to do with me and she was not trying to actively hurt me, it felt like I was getting hurt for some reason. I internalized a lot of that. So let's stop talking about how depressing I am, because it's going to get out of hand. So let's talk about what to do about it. Let's talk about what to do about your perfectionism, okay? There's a lot of different things. You might have heard this before, and I know that this is something that is not accessible to everyone, but therapy is a life-changing type of self-care to do for yourself. It's a little bit more accessible now with, I guess, telehealth. I would be weary of telehealth therapists because there have been a few companies that have gone through, I don't know if they're like official lawsuits or just kind of folks being like, I saw a therapist and they were not certified. They were just like a person who said they had a degree and they gave me some like bunk advice. But I do think therapy has been really helpful and at least offering a second voice for me to be like, hey, what you're saying is valid, but you have to look at why it doesn't make sense for the rest of your life. Like, your feelings are valid, but we need to work on this. And just having someone sit there and be able to be like, okay, last week we talked about this. Have you made progress? How are you feeling? Last week we talked about blah, blah, blah. What's going on, right? Having someone be like a sounding board for your life is really helpful, especially in perfectionism, because you can't even do therapy perfectly. And I was told that yesterday because I've been trying to do therapy perfectly. And she's like, you got to stop because you can't do that. Making more room for enjoyment and fun that is not productive. This one's really hard for me. Making room for activities and time in your day, which I know is not easy for everyone, depending on where you work, how you work, your living situation, your responsibilities, but giving yourself, even if it's 5 minutes, to sit and do something that is enjoyable for you, even if it's nothing, even if it's just listening to a song, and allowing it to not be something that produces anything, allowing it to be an activity that is just for you, just for your brain, just for your body, to get out of that fight or flight mode and not think about producing anything. That's really helpful. I have a hard time doing that. I always feel like when I'm on a walk, I got to be like listening to a self-care podcast, or I got to be like doing something productive. I got to be like answering emails. And lately I'm like, no, I'm going to go on a walk and I'm just like not going to listen to anything. And I'm just going to like look at the trees, and I'm just going to like look at the grass, and I'm just going to fucking think. And it's hard to do that, but you got to do it. Mindfulness, redirecting your thoughts. Also another toughie, because again, it's like breaking, it's like digging out of a trench that you might have for a long time. I have a perfectionism trench that has been dug to the bottom of the sea floor for many years. But when you have a perfectionist thought, and even identifying them is kind of the first step, right? Being like, why am I having this thought? Why do I think I need this to be perfect? Why does it matter, right? I always struggle with this podcast because I edit the podcast, I go home, I put it together, I put it on Spotify, I put it on YouTube. And then not only do I do that, like I got to come up with a title, I got to come up with a description, I got to make sure all the links are in there. You know, I got to make sure I'm putting the sources in there. I got to make sure that I'm clipping it. Oh shit, now I got to put it on social media. I got to caption it on fucking CapCut. And what's the brand? What's the font? What's the color? I want it to be the exact color code because I want all of my shit to look the same. And it's like, why am I sitting here stressing over all of these little things looking perfect when the thing that matters is the message within the podcast? And so even yesterday when I was editing the last episode to go out, I was like, okay, I'm not going to sit here and I'm not going to like obsess over writing the perfect, wittiest description. I'm just going to write a description. I'm just going to say what's in the episode. It doesn't need to be this like hilarious, ooh, she's so witty description. People know that I'm a comedian. It doesn't fucking matter, right? And so when you have those thoughts, asking yourself like, why does this matter? Who is looking at this? Who is looking at this through the lens with which I am looking at it? And then also trying to identify where your perfectionism comes from. Sometimes it can be really hard to identify that because It may not have been a parent. It may not have been someone in your life that made you feel like you were a high achiever. It may not have been something that you even developed until recently. Maybe you weren't the high achieving person. Maybe only recently you were like, no, I got to get it together and I'm going to do XYZ and I'm going to start on this journey and this journey has to be perfect. And asking yourself, what changed? Where did that come from? Why am I sitting here telling myself that if I do XYZ, it has to be XYZ exactly? It can't be QXY. It has to be XYZ exactly. Why are you doing that? Who is keeping tabs on you? Who is looking at you with a clipboard thinking, well, Morgan didn't do that the exact fucking right way. She's going to fail. And what does failure really mean? What are you afraid of? That's what you got to do. At least that's from my perspective of what to do about it from verywellmind.com, and also just my therapist telling me, hey, let's look a little deeper into this. And it's hard. It's really hard, especially when you may not have a therapist, you may not have a support system, you may not have someone that you feel comfortable talking to about, but hey, you can always talk to me. You can always email me. You can always DM me because I'm listening. I'm here to talk to you. Because God knows I didn't have someone to talk to for a long time. And now I have a microphone, and that's fucking scary, right? Thank you for listening today. Today was about perfectionism, and I'm not even going to end this episode perfectly because guess what? I'm moving out of perfectionism, but I am going to leave you with an affirmation. And this affirmation is probably something you've heard before, but here it goes. Progress is more important than perfection. World breaking. Florals for spring, groundbreaking. Thank you for listening. Support the pod. Come to Hourglass Social. Come to the Roast of Diet Culture. I've been Morgan Gallo. Bye. Thank you so much for listening to My Body, My Jokes. Please be advised that the information provided in this podcast is for general discussion purposes only and should not be considered medical advice. Always, always, always seek the advice of a qualified healthcare professional with any concerns you might have regarding the topics discussed in today's episode. Also, if you or someone you know is struggling with an eating disorder, please call the National Eating Disorders Association helpline at 1-800-931-2237. Bye.